So, right, without any more ado, I'm just want to briefly say how delighted we are to have Jenni here with us today. Jenni and I know each other, so it's especially lovely for me to see Jenni again. I'm going to let Jenni introduce herself and tell you more about herself, but suffice to say, Jenni has a wealth of experience in this area, and in fact has been awarded an OBE because of all the work she's done in this area. So we're very lucky to have her here. Deborah, I know you want to say a quick welcome on behalf of ALK Positive.
I just unmute myself. Yes, I just wanted to say thank you very much indeed, Jenni. We haven't had the pleasure of meeting, but I know that many of our members were looking forward to today's talk, and unfortunately several did have to pull out at the last minute with hospital appointments and various things, but I know that they're looking forward to looking at the recording. So we can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day to do this for us. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm really pleased you asked me. It feels really lovely to be helpful in this way.
Great, thank you. And Jenni is the support advisor for the Ruth Strauss Foundation, importantly, and obviously one of the aims of the Ruth Strauss Foundation is to support parents and families when they're facing, a possible bereavement. So Jenni, I'm going to hand over to you and let you say a little bit more about your work and who you are.
Thank you, Jen. I will tell you a little bit about me, but if there's anything you want to ask at the end or at some time, do please ask. But my background is many, many years in the NHS. I've spent almost 50 years working, firstly as a baby nurse, but in different parts of the hospital over the years. And most of what I learned was how unhelpful we were in situations where there was going to be a bereavement or there had been a bereavement. So staff didn't really know how to talk to you if you were somebody experiencing something really difficult around death. Death isn't sort of talked about in the NHS. I mean, this last year has changed things hugely, but my experience, I was often called to the wards to come and be with a doctor breaking very bad news. And I learned that my colleagues were probably just as able to do it as I was, but they were much more concerned that they'd be making it worse for the person. And I'd learned through my work that actually telling the truth and being open and honest gently doesn't make it worse. So I then decided I set up the Child Bereavement UK. I had my first job in the NHS as a counsellor in 1985, I think it was. And then I set up the Child Bereavement UK in 1994, primarily to train and support healthcare professionals, police, coroners, everyone who came in touch with people who had death part of their experience. And I left the child bereavement, I left the NHS in 2008, and I left child bereavement in 2009. And since then, I've been working with two small charities, and I've took up in 2019, I agreed to help the support within the Ruth Strauss Foundation. And the reason that it was it was a real honour to help Andrew in the work that he's doing with the Ruth Strauss Foundation, because I met Andrew and Ruth in the year that Ruth was dying. So she was a very, very big part of my learning in lots of ways, that what I was doing was really helpful, because she was very outspoken about that, was so helpful. And I've been doing it a lot. I got an email from her. That's how it happened. I got an email from Ruth saying, I've been given your name at the school gate, and I understand you help people if they've got a terminal diagnosis. I wonder if I could see you, because I want to try and do death well. And I immediately emailed her back and said, I'd really love to meet you. The way we can work is you can come to my home and we could have a cup of tea and chat about what doing death well means. Because they'd got two little boys. But I said, in preference, I'd like to see you and your husband or partner, if they were, willing. Because if there are two of you, it's going to be two of you going through this. And it's more helpful if you both know what the other one was doing or thinking. So she came along with Andrew. I had no idea who they were. She'd written to me as Ruth MacDonald. And I didn't know they were anyone well known until way back, much further. I saw them for at least 6 months before that penny dropped. And then it was only because they were going to Australia, and I asked Andrew if he knew Australia. And someone who'd spent his life playing cricket in Australia, it was pretty obvious that I didn't know who he was. And then very sadly, Ruth went to Australia with Andrew and their 2 boys. They've got 2 sons. And she planned to do everything she could to have as good a time as possible with her family until she died. And she died with her own family, her maternal family, her mother and her sister, and they were staying with. But before she went, she'd put 2, on our last appointment at the beginning of December, she'd put 2 dates in the diary for meeting when they got back. And I didn't think that was probably going to be likely, but in fact, of course, it wasn't. She died just between Christmas and New Year. But it did mean that Andrew was in the diary. And I thought that was such a wonderful thing for a partner to have done. At some level, I'm sure she knew that they weren't going to be coming together. But it did give him something where he could get a bit of support once she died. And I haven't done a great deal, but I have stayed in touch and I've been supportive and I've learned a lot from him. And obviously I got involved as soon as he asked me to in the Ruth Strauss Foundation. So what I'm doing at the moment is taking calls that the Ruth Strauss Foundation pass across to me through Ines, who's somebody that is enormously supportive and good for me. She lets me know in an email that somebody's rung the foundation and wants some help. And then she asks me and I say, yes, I'm fine. Please let them know they can contact me, or I contact them. So and I've done this for the last year and a bit, I think 1.5 years now. And I've learned a lot and I've met some really, really lovely people. The hardest bit actually for me in this job has been realizing that actually I probably won't have an ending with them, because you don't stay in touch. I'm not a counsellor. I'm actually there to provide guidance and support around dying, not around bereavement. And although of course a massive amount of having that sort of news is all about grief. So I'm talking about grief all the time, but the bereavement is what happens to you. Grief is how you feel, and mourning is what you do. And I don't do the bereavement in the morning because I'm no longer in touch, because that's not part of my job. I do that actually for 2 other charities in a slightly different way. It's around the loss of a child. So with the Ruth Strauss Foundation, I take the calls, and I usually I'd ask that if they'd both like to be in on the call. Last year was very, very busy, and you will all know how dreadful last year was. It was horrendous for the families that got in touch with me. I found, because my natural nature is to be with people, and I really like being with people, I found it incredibly difficult doing this blooming Zoom stuff. I almost wanted to climb into my computer just to be able to have a hug, or just to say, I'm so sorry that this must be so difficult for you. And I don't for 1 minute think whatever I say, it is the most difficult thing I think any parent has to do, is tell their child or their children that they're not going to live and be there for them as they get older. Because most of the families I get have had a terminal diagnosis. So it is terminal. Terminal can mean a huge range of things. And interestingly enough, I think, I don't know where this came up, but I think you mentioned it actually, even introducing me. I do see people who make appointments. If they live within this local area and are willing to come here, they can. I haven't done a lot of that at all. It's mostly been on the phone. But a lady that I was due to see yesterday, who I was really looking forward to it. I had it in my diary, and at the 11th hour, she was too poorly, and I don't go to her. And I realised how much that sort of affected me. You realise that people can put on a good face on the phone and talk to you, but actually when you see them normally face to face and you realize just how difficult life is. And I know that for her to have cancelled yesterday would have been a very big thing for her, because it was in the diary for ages. And I also realise how hard it is when you've got children, knowing when is the right time to talk to them about not living. You know, I think there's a whole bit of me that says it's important to be honest and not to lie to children. It is important, but quite how honest you need to be, I think needs to be very much guided by the parents. I don't profess to know. I have never had to be in this terrible position that any one of you are facing. But I think it's helpful to start to introduce the subject. And that's what happened with Ruth Strauss. When Ruth and Andrew first came, they just wanted to understand a bit how children might react to the news and at what stage do you start. And I think for us and for me, what I'm doing with families currently is helping parents to talk about how much the children know already, because what are they aware of? Because you probably know this, but excuse me, I've just got a little boy having a rather lovely time next door. Can I just close my door?
Sure, definitely.
That won't be a minute. Oh, Henry. He's just shot somebody with his gun. Oh, dear me.
Very good. Very good.
It's very good for me, actually. Feeling that life's going on around you when you're doing this work can be really lovely. Just knowing, I live in a little terraced row, and I love the fact that life does go on as well, and as well as sad things, obviously. So where was I?
Sorry, I was going to say, you were saying about when do you, I mean, we've got a few questions that I'm going to ask you, but I know you're going to talk first. Sorry, I just also want to say that if anybody's got any questions, please use the chat facility, because Deborah's going to be monitoring that, and there will be an opportunity to put those extra questions if you have any to Jenny at the end. But Jenny, you were talking about when to tell children and how to tell children.
First of all, I think it's really important to recognise that children do have a sense that something is happening in a family. I used to see children, I've worked with children, that's been part of my life's work. And invariably children would say, well, mummy doesn't know, but I heard her on the phone, or daddy was saying something in the car to someone and I heard him talk about mummy and or daddy, they do overhear. They also think that there's something a bit wrong going on. They pick up an atmosphere. And that can make them really quite worried that they've done something that they shouldn't have done. And often they have, of course, but they do pick up that something's going on in the family. So I suggest that it's always helpful to start with asking children what they know. Mummy's not been very well lately, or daddy has not been into work because he's been having some treatment. What have you been thinking about what that might be about? And quite often children will tell you that they have been aware that something's happening. A lot of my work, when I worked with children, I walk with them. So if I was asked by a parent to help with a child in bereavement, I'd quite often, especially if it was teenagers, we'd go for a walk. Because actually, if you're walking along next to somebody, you haven't got to look at them. Whereas with adults, it's lovely to be able to look and see each other and cry together. It's actually fine for couples to do that. But with children, it's a bit more difficult. And I think it gives them more permission to talk about things that might be difficult if it's either in a very natural setting. And certainly start with by asking them, what have they noticed? And is there anything that they're concerned about? And part of one of the things the Ruth Strauss Foundation is doing, and it'll be such a nice resource to have, is there's a book called The Little C book, and it's all about cancer, and it's cards that talk about cancer. So introducing your child to cancer and how you talk about cancer is the first part of this book. And then the second part is very much when mommy or daddy is not getting better, when they're going to die. We haven't done a huge amount in that, but that's part of the reason. It's the starting off of these conversations. So you don't have to come in with very big stuff to begin with, unless you've got very little time. I'm really aware that everyone will be so different and you'll all have your own different feelings and views. I mean, a very good example of how different it can be. I had a call, I made a call to a husband and wife just in December, and he had sadly no symptoms, but had been diagnosed with cancer of the bowel, and he'd been given a few months to live, and he looked immensely healthy on Zoom. We chatted for an hour, and they had 3 children, but he'd been given just a short time to get his house in order. And he was asking me how he even began to do that, because one of their children was autistic. So we had a very big conversation on how to start that conversation and how to take it and to come back to me, which he did, but how to take it when the start had happened and there'd been a bit of upset of the reaction, but not to go back on what you've said, because that wouldn't be helpful. And I was very shocked, because I don't follow up everybody, or no, that's not part of my role. But I was very shocked to learn that he died in March. So he lived for just 3 months, having had a terminal diagnosis, and that can happen. And I'm sure lots of you realise that. And you can live for a long time today, especially all the different therapy, the different chemo, you get to an end of a trial and it feels like the end of the world, and then there's another trial you can go on. I've got a couple of people that have been over to Boston to start a new trial. So, you can travel if you're lucky enough to be able to travel, to have a few more months of life. And when do you make that a much more difficult conversation about dying? And I think I can only say, I think it depends on you as a person and your husband, how you're both going to do this, and hopefully you can do it in agreement, and using dying. Once you've told them about cancer, you can say, have you noticed anything a bit further down the line? And you probably get, yes, you're not getting better, the doctor's rubbish, or something like that. It's really, really helpful to say everyone's doing everything they can. It's terribly helpful that children don't feel that the care that their parent is getting is not good enough, that something more should be done. That's very frightening, because it leaves them feeling very insecure about life, and if they got anything wrong with them. And I do know children where that's happened. So, and they need to know it's not catching. They need to know that it's nothing that they did. I know mummy's been very grumpy lately, or daddy's been very grumpy lately, but it's not because of you. It's just that because his cancer, his breathing is much, much harder, and he's finding life much more difficult. And then I think concentrating not just on the dying and death, but actually then trying to, if you can, and I know this is a very tall order, but think about every single day that you have, leaving as helpful a memory behind as possible. So that every little thing that a child has been involved in that day with you, the dying parent, whether it's just taking them to school or, remembering that this is a memory that you're leaving for life. Because the children I've seen that have been able to have that sort of care do manage. There's no evidence at all that being a bereaved child makes you less able to be a success in life. You have a great opportunity, if you've only got a short time to live, to give your child every resource possible to manage their life, because they've got good memories. And funny little things, I know it sounds daft, but I've realized over the years, because I've done this often, just having a conversation, not because I'm dying, I'm going to have this conversation, but that you're having this conversation, talking about what it was like giving birth to your child, and what it weighed, and who held it first, and what was it like? What did you feel like? and being really honest, I don't mean giving gory details of a birth, but just being really honest about how it felt having your child and how pleased you were when it was the third child or whatever. Just talk about things that actually, in my experience, because I'm very fortunate to be a mum and a granny, I've learned that there's so many things that I talk to my grandchildren now about who, are teenagers and I'm quite interested in their birth or have been interested in what's happened. And I can tell them, and obviously my daughters and sons do as well, but it's like all those things that you gradually want to know about when you get to teens or young adulthood, you don't have your parent to ask. So if you've managed when they were younger to be able to give them some of that information, not because I'm dying, I'm telling you this, but more about just because I'm wanting to know about life and life ever since you were born and what you hope for and your dreams in a way. And I think that those are very, very precious for children and bereaved children afterwards. The more they have memories of a time that was a lovely time with you. Or I remember one little boy whose mummy was dying in the hospital. It was pretty awful because she hadn't been able to get home and the ward was very busy and I'd been asked to go across and help because this little fellow who was only about 9 was coming in to see her. And she asked me, she was on a drip, she looked really ill, and she asked me how she could tell him that she wasn't going to live. She wanted him to know how special he was and not to be told lies, but she didn't know how to do it. And I offered to help. And so we waited. He came in with his daddy after school. I managed to talk to the dad and say, this is what mum had said. She'd really like some help with this. And I asked her what she felt she'd like to say. If she just had me there, just as somebody in the room with her in this bed, what would she like to say? And she said, I'd just like him to know that he's been such a special boy in my life and how much I love him. And that although I'm dying, I'll always be part of him. He'll always have a bit of me because I'm his mum. And I was the one that he grew in. And she said a few things like that were really meaningful, and she was very ill. And I said, that sounds absolutely wonderful. Do you just need me to stay? She said, yes, please. So he came in with his dad after school. Dad was fine with whatever we needed to do. And she told this little boy that she, how much she loved him and that doctors weren't able to make her better. Everyone done everyone, but her body was giving up and she felt so ill she wouldn't live very long now. And he said, will you be coming to my sports day? Will you be there for my sports day? It was sort of like a June day, I think now. And she said, no, I won't, sweetheart. I won't be there for your sports day. And I can't remember what else was said. It was just a very short little conversation and he was quite upset. And because she had so many tubes and things coming out of her, I wanted to put him into bed with her because he wanted to get close. So all I could think of was to put him at the bottom of the bed, and I turned the sheets back and put him in and put her feet on his lap. And I showed him how when I work with babies in the baby unit, I do baby massage on their feet. And I just showed him how he could gently touch his mummy's feet and not very hard, don't tickle them, and then just hold them. Because when you hold somebody's foot, it's like you're holding all of them. And he did it really seriously. And his mummy said, that's so lovely. I love you holding me like that. And it was just little hands on her foot. It was so sweet. And I eventually left. I went and found the ward sister who was pretty horrified that a child was in the wrong end of the bed. But I said, that this is what needs to happen. And I'm happy to pop in tomorrow. She actually died that night. That little boy I saw a few times after his mum's death, he's a teenager now, and he remembers with such pride. Oh, he did mouth, he used a cotton wool bud to put Vaseline on her lips because her lips were so dry. And he wanted to, just tell me about how pleased he was he did what he did because he didn't know she was so ill. He thought she'd just gone into hospital again because had been ill so many times. So that's a very final thing to be telling your child just when you're dying. And I would suggest that it's unlikely that that's would be particularly helpful as late as that. I think it certainly would be more helpful for him to have had a bit more time, and for not to be in an NHS hospital, general hospital ward. It was pretty different to being in a hospice. It's on the Ruth website, Ruth Strauss website. I wrote years ago, 30 years ago, and I think, you know, I just wrote what children had taught me. I wrote a book called This Is About Me and You. And it's pages that you can download, a page at a time, from the website. And the first page is This Is About Me and You. And the me is mummy or daddy. So the daddy, you do this with a child, per child. And you go through the pages with, this is my name, and then that's me, and then the child writes their name. And then first page goes into, this is what's happening, I'm having treatment at a hospital or a hospice. So it immediately helps you have communication and using words with the child, you know, about something that you don't normally talk about. You wouldn't talk to a child about a hospice. So, and then what your condition is, you know, and there's a drawing of a body, you know, where you've got the lump and where you've got the cancer, and you draw it, and the child does it with you. You could tell them and they can do the drawing. They're just sort of A4 size pages. And then you go through each one. These are some of the things I feel, and daddy or mummy tick them. I don't feel hungry anymore. I feel scared, and then, so that's me, and then the you, and the child ticks the you. And some of that opens up huge questions with the child, because they also feel frightened for their own body, and they think that something could be catching. I can't remember myself now, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, Jenny, you've touched on the fact that children might feel scared or upset, and say you've managed to start this conversation with your child at whatever age, younger or teenager, and you've said, mummy or daddy mum or dad might not be around for as long as they want to be, they may not see you grow up in the, as they would have hoped. What about when children are very upset, very sad, sometimes children act out reactions to that sort of news and are anxious or angry or stop being able to sleep? What do you do in those kind of situations where you have a child who has taken on board the news and the conversation has been helpful for everybody, but then there is this reaction to it, which, I mean, why wouldn't there be, really?
Well, you've answered my question, really. I mean, I would tell a parent, if I was involved, that actually it's quite good news that they're showing you, because the way children behave is how they show feelings. So it's really important that they do show feelings if they've got them. If they can verbalize them, that's fine. But if they have to scream them, that's fine. They might act out. I know one little boy who just kept weeing in the garage, didn't use the loo. He was so angry, he just did a wee in the garage. And he said it's because he was so cross about his daddy dying. He didn't want a daddy that was going to die, so he just wee in the garage where his daddy put the car. No good punishing a child for that. Not at all. It was really helpful the way the parents together, we sort of worked out a way of just saying to him, it was understandable that that weeing felt like he was just very, very angry. And would he help with some disinfectant, put some water on that wee, and try and talk about what it felt like, so we didn't have to leave that awful thing in the garage. And, it takes a hang of a lot from parents. I absolutely understand that. It takes a huge amount. But the more you can help a child by saying, well, can you tell me about what that felt like? Where does that feeling be? Where is it in your body when you feel so angry with daddy? Where would the feeling be? And some children will say, rub their leg, and you say, what do you want to do with your leg? I want to kick something. Well, let's go out and kick a ball. Tell your friends or mummy or daddy or someone that when you feel very, very upset like that, do something physical that doesn't hurt anybody. kick the ball, kick it against a wall, kick it as hard as you can, or go for a run, or physical help. It helps hugely with children if you can do something physical with them. I mean, sometimes it's a single parent, and there's no way the single parent is well enough to do physical things, but try and arrange it with friends to take the child and to do something physical with them. And sometimes it's just deep sobbing, real fear, can't sleep, frightened. Again, the more you can ask them to talk to you about it. Do drawings, draw what is you're frightened of, paint. I did a training in art therapy, and it was invaluable learning. You don't have to interpret anything. You just ask the child, or whoever you're working with, to try and show it in a picture. And if they do a picture, you can then say, well, tell me about blue and tell me about red. And just try and see ways of helping them express it. Because some children are not very expressive. And some children show things in a way that aren't terribly clear. They might not be able to speak, but they'll come up or they want to hold your hand, or they want to give you a hug from behind. And, you know, saying to them, you don't have to talk to mummy about how you feel or daddy. It's all right to have your feeling, but it's really lovely when you give me a hug or hold my hand. I feel you don't need words for that. I feel that's as good as anyone could ever give. Yes, and I think also I've been involved with a father that wanted to tell his two sons that he hadn't long to live. And unfortunately, their marriage had split up, so it was just him on his own. And I offered to see the two little boys with their daddy. I'd never met them, but I knew the dad from a couple of meetings, and he had very little time to live. He didn't look terribly unwell, he was just thin. And he arrived with these two boys, and he told them that he'd seen me and that I was a lady who helped talk about dying and death. And he felt that he wanted somebody with him to be able to tell them that he wasn't going to be there for sports day again, or for cricket, or one of the matches that they were in. He did all of that. He loved his boys and sport. It was very, very upsetting. I mean, he sat in an armchair and the two boys sat in the little chairs near him. And I was over here, and he really struggled saying the words, and that I won't be there. And it's not because I don't want to be there. I want to know how you get on. I want to do it more than anything in my whole life. It's what I want, but I can't do anything about it. Doctors have done everything, and I probably will die in the next month or 2 or 3. And I want to be able to see you and to do things with you. And they both listened very, very seriously. The one little boy just sort of actually looked out of the window and looked completely detached from what was being said. The slightly older boy looked very, very closely at his dad. And when his dad said, I'm so worried about how it's going to be for you. I wanted to be there with you when you were growing up, and I wanted to be your dad and guide you. And he said some very moving things, and he didn't cry, but he broke down. And the boy didn't move, funnily enough, from his chair. But he said, Dad, and his dad sort of looked at him. I think he was 13. He said, Dad, you've been the best dad in the world. And I've had 14 years of you as my dad. You've taught me everything I know. I'm going to be all right. I've got all of that from you. It was so moving. I couldn't believe the absolute enormity of that little boy's ability to reach out and give his dad this comfort. He said, don't worry about me, Dad. I've got everything you've given me. And the dad did get very upset and said, thank you for saying that. And he did get up off his little chair and came over and gave his dad a hug. And then I asked his little brother if he'd like to, and he said, no, he didn't want to. And I said, that's all right. Sometimes when you hear very sad things, you don't want to be touched, you don't want to hug, you don't want to talk. That's absolutely fine. It's really fine. You're fine with whatever you feel you need to do. Daddy will be able to manage, and you can talk to mummy about it when you go home, because they were living with their mum. So, and that dad died quite soon after that. And I have been in touch with those boys, just briefly. I think that twice I've seen them. And they are okay. The one who said he was all right really has excelled and is a bit of a workaholic. So he's done terribly well at school, far outweighed what he was like before. So he's thrown himself into schoolwork. The other child is really quite angry and more difficult. So that's just one sort of example. I'm ready for questions because
yes,
I'll
Jenny,
go on.
I'm going to start with a few questions. I mean, you touched there on a dad. I mean, this was obviously at a very particular point when he knew he wasn't going to live for very long. But you touched on the fact that the dad got upset in front of his children, and I think all of us here today know that you know, however long we have, and hopefully it will be a long time, that it's a roller coaster having treatment, and that we face progression, and we face bad news, we face progression, we face changes of treatment, sometimes we're not so well because we've had some chemo, sometimes we're not so well because we're having a very bad side effect reaction to a treatment that we're on. So I suppose my question is, how do you handle that? Is it okay to let your children see that you're sad or you're upset or you're struggling, or indeed in pain or not very well? I mean, I know as parents, our instinct is always to kind of battle on and try to put on a very brave face for the kids, but it's not always possible. So when you are feeling particularly low or you're feeling particularly unwell, you've spent the day in bed, I mean, obviously the concern of parents is, how is that distressing for the children? How do we make it less distressing, and how do we handle that scenario? Because it's one I think we all face, whatever age our children are.
I think it's a hugely important question, and I think that the best way is to be honest. Dad's had a really terrible day today, and I feel so ill, and I haven't got up at all. I'm not really eating. What I'd love you to do is go and get me the paper or bring me a drink of water. Give children something to do when you tell them that you're feeling really awful, and then give them permission to go and watch some telly. You give them permission that they're not feeling awful. They haven't got to hang around. And try and arrange it so that when you do tell children some news that is very difficult to tell them, make sure they've got something nice to do later. Children can switch in and out of those sort of situations. They're not the ones that are feeling ill, but they can feel very, very guilty later on if they didn't know, and they didn't realize how ill their mum or dad felt. If they did know, and they could do something like say, I love you, mum, or love you, dad, or go and get a drink, and the parent gives them permission to have a life. You have to give children who are living with a parent with a death sentence permission for life. They need to be able to get on with their life, and they need to know that you really want them to do that. You really want them to have a nice time, but you also need to tell them when you feel very unwell. And if you feel very upset, it's perfectly all right to cry in front of your child. I don't think it's helpful to get hysterically upset. Do that with some adult that really can hold you and listen. But don't feel you've got to hide that from your children, because children learn about this from life experience. How are they ever going to learn about grief? If they never see it, the parents teach you. That's how you learn about life. And so I think it's quite important. And then to say when you feel a bit better, to say that was a really nasty, awful 3 weeks, but actually the trial I'm on now, I've probably got quite a nice time. And one dad actually that I saw, his wife died also a couple of months ago, but they even planned a couple of holidays with the boys, but told them that mummy might die. We might not get there, but we're going to plan them. And if mummy does die, dad was going to take them on something anyway. So they knew that the holidays weren't going to go as well as not having their mum. And that's what's happened. It's very impressive. And some children do not want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about death and dying. I never would ask a child how it felt. Because, I often don't know how I feel. Adults don't know how they feel. So how would we expect children to be able to verbalize how they feel? it's, you know, you can ask them about how, you know, what's it like in your body, or what's the hardest thing for you at the moment. But to do a sort of counselling session of tell me how you feel is very unlikely to work with a child.
And I think that's probably the case, no matter, you know, as a mother of teenagers, you think maybe teenagers might be better at having those conversations, but actually they don't often want to talk about it either, because their lives are consumed with other things. And I suppose
good.
Exactly. But I suppose I was interested in what you said about giving children a role. And I wondered if you maybe thought that that was important, you know, the cup of tea, or I'd love a blanket, or, you know, could you watch a video with me? I'd love that if we just snuggled up and watched, you know, some rubbishy television program together. I mean, how do you feel that that plays into the whole scenario of bad news and helping your kids?
Oh, I think that's wonderful. I think that's a really helpful. I know one family, actually, when the dad was dying, the mum instigated this, that Sunday mornings were always in bed all together. And one of the children was a teenager, the other two were younger. But they'd all get into somewhere in their big double bed with Daddy, who was very, very poorly. And they'd talk about how they'd have a feeling time in the bed on a Sunday morning. And then they'd do something really nice. And sometimes Dad couldn't do it because he was so ill. He broke down a few times. But the boys actually somehow managed to talk about how they felt afterwards, which I was really impressed with. You know, once he died, once this dad had died, the boys were able to talk about feelings, because actually he taught them how to do it. He didn't say, well, I'm dying and I'm all right, and don't worry about me and you'll be all right. So I don't want to die. I want to be alive, and I feel really upset about it. And I'm doing everything I can. And doctors are helping me, but actually there's nothing more I can do. Sometimes in the books that are talked about, the You and Me book, it's really helpful for the parents, the adults, to get it, download it, and have a look at it together and do it together as two adults. It's really useful, because then you learn about, well, how do you feel about things? And when one of the pages, I put this in because so many children will talk about having had a bad dream. So there's a page there that says, they're clouds. Have you had any dreams lately? Fill in your dreams, or tell mummy or daddy about your dream. Because quite often children will tell you they've had something in a dream that actually isn't a dream. It's what they really are quite worried about. But it's easier to make it a dream. Oh, this big bogeyman came to get me in the night. What would happen if somebody dies in the night? Do you just die and stay in the bed all night? Who tells anybody? You know, all those sort of questions are so helpful. And then what do you believe? You know, do you believe that you're going to go to heaven? Or do you believe you come back as a sparrow? Or all these different things that children learn about beliefs in life. And I had, again, another wonderful mother that talked about her death in front of me. We talked about how to do it. And then I was there when she told her two little girls. They were quite little. They were about 5 and 7. That she wasn't going to live for very long, that she was going to die. And she said, people will tell you when I die that I've gone to heaven. But Daddy and I have never lied to you about mummy's illness and all the time she's had it. And we're not going to start now, because your mummy, I don't believe in heaven. I feel that when I die, that's the end. There is no more me, but there will always be a part of me that lives on in you. And she said, that brings me, as your mummy, great comfort to know I'll always be part of you. And you will always know when I've died that you'll have part of me in you. And I saw that family when she died. In fact, I was phoned to come and say bye-bye. She's still at home in the double bed upstairs with a cat on top of her. And the children were cycling around the garden, these two little girls. It was a sunny day. And I arrived and I went, hi, Jenny. And mummy's upstairs with whatever, Fluffy or whatever it was called. And they took me upstairs to see their dead mummy. Because they weren't actually that frightened. You know, I think we can be terribly frightened about death as adults. But when you explain to children, well, we had done this with these two girls, that when you die, your body doesn't work anymore. You know, you can't feel, you can't think, you're not scared, you're not hungry, you're not cold, you're not hot, your body just stops working. Makes total sense to children, because then they understand why you need a funeral, because it's just a body that has to be buried or cremated. It's not your actual person. Person has died. That was part. And you could say, well, in our family we believe there's a spirit, and the spirit goes to Jesus or whatever. And never say what you think if you're the person supporting the family, of course. And I don't know half the time what I think. So I think, you know, we change, and we have ideas, and we talk to children about those. So those two little girls knew that they'd always have this bit of their mummy, and that both of them are very like her. They've both gone on to Cambridge. They've both done terribly well, and she was a highly achiever of a mum. She couldn't beat this awful cancer, but she left them with a legacy of being brave and strong and successful and loved. They felt very loved, and they were only little, so they hadn't had a lot of her in their life.
And Jenni, what about, sorry, I was just going to say, what about, I mean, this is a thing that parents feel. What about guilt? Do you have any thoughts on that? Because I think one of the things we all as parents feel is terribly, terribly guilty. It's totally irrational, but we feel very guilty that we're causing this pain to our children, that we're bringing this to them. And I just wondered if you had any, you know, thoughts or words on that, because I think that's something that, you know, we all struggle with. You know, the impulse is to say, I'm so sorry, when you have to tell children something, and you really feel as if you're doing it to them, even though obviously we have no control over our cancer.
No, I think that's a really big one. Everybody, I think, has a sense of feeling really guilty. How can I do this? These are the people that I love most in the world, and how can I do this to them? I think guilt is a big part of that. My suggestion is find somebody that you can really support you and talk to, that is an adult. I often have people talk about guilt. And I think guilt's it's a big part of grieving and grief. You know, it's not something to poo-poo or not to say, don't feel guilty. Of course you feel guilty. You know, of course it's there. But guilt can be about punishing ourselves. So there's a bit of me that would encourage the person that feels so guilty to realize you don't need any more punishing. You know, you've got so much punishment. You're going to leave your children. Don't have more guilt. You know, for you, that's an absolute agony. I mean, none of us want to leave our children. Of course we don't. At whatever stage of their life they're at, even when they're grown up, you know, it's sort of the most awful thing to have to face. But if you do it well, and if you do it gently and kindly, and you get advice and support, your children will survive. They will manage. You know, some children obviously have much greater difficulty than others, especially if they have to leave their schools when you die, because you have to move. They can't stay in the same house, particularly if they haven't been told. Suddenly there's huge disruption. Children can feel quite embarrassed as well. And it sounds funny, but kids will talk to me about being embarrassed about having a parent that's dying. You know, you don't want it really. You want to be like everyone else in the class. You don't want to have a dead parent that's going to be dead. So that, you know, that's another part of feeling embarrassed. So you don't really want to talk about it. And the more you talk about it generally, in a not too macabre, heavy way, the more it becomes a reality. You know, talking about death makes it a reality. And the truth is that you are not going to live very long. You don't know how long it is, and you don't have to go in heavy when you're still having, you know, a fairly normal life. And you might have some very bad treatments. You need to explain those, but tell them when you're better. And then when you get to the stage where, like I spoke about that dad who died quite quickly, or that little boy in the hospital bed, you know, the parent did die quite quickly. And it would have probably been helpful if they'd known a little bit sooner, because then they could have done more because there can be regrets for children. I remember filming a young boy once. I made a film about children and grief, and I filmed this teenage boy, and I had no idea. I knew him, and he never said this to me when I filmed him. I said, is there anything else you want to say on film to me? And he said, I just don't remember if I said goodbye to her, kissed her that morning before I left. I was at A-levels or something. He said, I don't remember, and I always feel all my life I'm going to have that one because I didn't say goodbye to my mum. I feel really bad about it. And, you know, and of course that will happen. But, you know, this mum he'd gone to school when she was completely fine and well. She'd been hit by a car and it was a sudden death. In situations where you have a terminal condition, you do have time to leave some very precious memories. I'm not saying that's better, but for children where it's a sudden unexpected death and they walk out and go to do their A-levels and then they come back from school and their mother's been killed in an accident, you feel a lot of grief that you didn't do. So create as many things for your children that are about what they did do with you. You know, write up, make scrapbooks for holidays. I don't know what, you know, you've got to be a certain sort of person. Some people are absolutely wonderful at that, but, you know, leave things for them for when you die. And also it's really helpful to talk to your partner or to someone close to you, talk about what you want for when you die. You know, what sort of funeral do you want? What would you like? What's your favorite poem? What's the music? All those sort of things are incredibly comforting when you die for the children to know about.
You've just touched, Jenny, on a question that somebody sent in, which is this is a mother of teenage girls, and she writes, "We're not in denial, but we don't want cancer to dominate their lives or make the girls overly anxious about the future at this point in time." And she's referring to the fact that you know, this idea that timescales are so uncertain. You know, she could be here for another 5 years or 2 years, who knows? Is it better to start preparing them now and risk prolonging their anxiety? Or is it better to hold fire on the preparation for loss conversations until progression occurs and keep things as normal as possible, while quietly building their resilience, emotional literacy and support networks in the background?
Oh, what a wise woman. That's perfect. Of course, that's what's to do. There's no point in bringing it up when everything's manageable. Absolutely. And I love, there's a model, an education model that I use that talks about parents being able to prepare their children it's about building their self-esteem. So in this time, whether you've got a year or 5 years, you know, building up your children's self-esteem by, and we all need our self-esteem building, all of us. It's lovely, you know, if somebody says something to you that you really appreciate. So with children, it's our I am, I have, and I can. And the I am is, as a child, I am whatever the child is, truthfully. You can't tell a fib. You know, it's no good saying you're a very kind boy when he's not a very kind boy at all. But whatever it is that child's natural, and they've all got them. They've all got things that you just know they were sort of born with, natural way of being. And tell them about that, not too overly and not in a way that doesn't feel truthful. Because of all the members of the population, don't start, you know, trying to fib to children because they pick it up straight away if you're not being truthful. So the I am is how they are, whether they're thoughtful, kind, generous, whatever it is. And then the I have is build up what that lady that you just read out, build up their resilience by telling them how many people they have in their life that cares and loves them. And I had one little boy, and when I asked him about this, I asked who he had, he said it was the dinner lady. And I thought it was so lovely. This was a little bereaved boy. His mummy had died, and I asked him, you know, who did he have in his life? And the first person he said was the dinner lady. And it was because she looked out for him in break time. Because after the death, he'd felt different to the rest of them, and they'd all played, and they felt a bit rough suddenly. I expect he just felt fragile. And this dinner lady used to always find him in the playground and then go and find another child that was also being a bit on their own and set up a little safe place for this bereaved child to have his break. Oh, I thought it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I thought, what a kind, and I think some schools are marvelous. You must tell the school, you know, they must know gently what's going on so they can look out for your child. So I think that's really important. So that's the I have. So who do they have in the family? Are they lucky enough to have aunties, uncles, cousins, or someone they call auntie because it's mummy's best friend? Or who do they have in their life that they have? You know, whoever that is, just talk about that in this time you have, whether it's 1 year or 5 years. Talk about who you have in the family and realize that people like grandparents and aunties and uncles and all of those really matter in situations where there's going to be a very big grief and a big lot of loss. And it's helpful to say to those people, I really would value you being there, you know, because it'll matter. And then the third one is I can, and that speaks for itself in a way. I can is about I can do things really well. I got a little girl that sent me a postcard not very long ago. Her daddy's dying, and she makes him, and it was in COVID, and he had to be isolated, and she couldn't see him for weeks on end. And it was awful. And I think she's about 10, she did cupcakes for him and did patterns on the cupcake that were exquisite. I mean, beautiful, beautiful cupcakes. Her mum said she'd really taken to making something tasty for her dad to have as a treat. So that's what her I can is. She can really cook a lovely cupcake. Or it could be for a boy, you can run so fast. You really can, whatever. You know, again, I saw a child years ago who'd had a lot of loss. He'd lost his mum and lots of loss in his life. And I went to watch him play football. I sat in the car for a bit of it. It was in the winter. And I got out at the sort of half time and they were all having little bits of oranges. And I waited to the end of the match and said to him, I noticed that he'd had oranges. And what was that? And he said, because we all get really dry in our throats and we run so fast. And I said, do you know, I noticed, Charlie, how fast you can run. I would never have believed. I saw you going from this end of the picture to that. He put in a school, so that was that conversation. Then I left, went home, and he put in a school thing when he was asked, what did you do in the holidays? He said, my bereavement counsellor came to see me be a star at football. And this lovely school, I didn't even know it was out near Oxford, had written to say, we've traced you who this bereavement counsellor is. And we just wanted you to know that Charlie thought, you know, you were so special because you'd actually come to watch him play football. So it's not big stuff. I was working in the car half the time. I just mostly got out for the little bits that I could. So
I'm assuming that those three things apply to children of any age. You can do it for, you know, build up the resilience of teenagers, you know, 24-year-olds, you know, 8-year-olds. It's something that we can all do.
Any age, it doesn't matter. But us as well. You know, I think I love it when somebody, you know, sees me for who I really am and rates me and sees what I can do. And that we all need our self-esteem built. And for children, I mean, you must be subtle. It's no good trying to do it because they think, oh, something's happening, you know, mum never says this or dad never says this. It's really important to try and build their self-esteem, their resilience. That lady's words, that lady that left a question, I thought that was so wise, because all you have got now is time in which you can give your children probably more than most of us give, because we know that we're not going to be there for the whole of it. It's a bit like if you think you've got the children all your life, you probably leave things to do later, but you haven't got later. So you need to gently work on now, and it makes a very, very big difference to one of my greatest learnings in all of this is how disadvantaged children are who haven't been told and don't know. You know, I don't want to harp on that, because that sadly is the case in lots of situations. People do not tell their children, and those children feel very fearful of the future. They don't necessarily trust adults. It's hard to trust someone when you haven't been included in something very big. And I'm not saying all the way down the line, because you could suddenly get ill and go, but you know, as best as you can, be as truthful as you can, without spoiling their life. I always think about whenever I've seen a child, you must remember to put the blossom on the tree. You know, we talk about the tree of life and how they're doing and what's hard and what's not hard. But then when they're leaving, this is in the days where I used to see children, you know, I'd talk about, well, what are you going to do now? What are you going to do when you leave? Or what are you going to do at the weekend? So if you do have a very sad and difficult conversation with any age of your child, think about looking at what are you going to give them permission to do when that conversation is ended.
And Jenny, whilst we're, you know, doing all these things and, you know, making memories with our kids and, you know, building up their emotional resilience, as you say, is it okay as well to be saying, can you please pick up your underpants? And, you know, I do not want you, you know, dropping your muddy football boots in the sitting room on the best rug. I mean, how, you know, presumably, I mean, because you don't want that to be another pressure that I have to be doing this all the time, you know, that I can't actually interact normally with my children anymore as well. And obviously kids are still going to be damned annoying, aren't they?
Oh, drive you mad. Of course, it's really, really important to keep normal discipline. It's not helpful to suddenly become this parent that allows for stuff, because it doesn't set them up for life. It's not, you know, your role is a parent right until you die. And so, no, it's really important if you keep to what matters. It's helpful not to say, because of my cancer, you know, or because I'm dying, bring your football boots, don't bring them in. You know, try not to be, you know, a martyr about it. But I say try not to be, because it must be very difficult when you feel really poorly and they do awful things. But, you know, do stick to the same rules. You know, and it's not all right to wee in the garage. You know, it's not all right, because that little boy was just showing his total anger and frustration. Yeah, but we need to look at why you're doing that, you know, but just normal household things. I love it. I did some work. I was lucky enough years ago to have some training with somebody called Robin Skinner. He wrote a book called Families and How to Survive Them with John Cleese. So you can imagine was quite a character. Sadly, he's died now. But he suggested that it was always helpful, rather than give children set jobs, get Post-its and put them on your fridge, and have what the jobs are in writing. So you negotiate this with the child. You know, one of them feeds the dog, one of them unloads the dishwasher, one of them does all the little jobs in a family. And you decide them on a Sunday meeting, and you put them on the fridge, and it's up there for the whole room to see, the whole house to see. And if one of the children doesn't want to walk the dog, or they have to negotiate a deal with one of the other children. That's if you're lucky enough to have more than one child. But so that it's you as the parent doesn't all the time have to be the sort of ringmaster, especially if you're feeling ill and poorly. So it's perfectly normal. He taught me, and he was a psychiatrist, psychotherapist, wise man. He said, just put it on Post-its on the fridge and get the children to do the negotiation. And I think that's very, very helpful. I mean, somebody might think that's completely nuts, but it really worked. I've got 4 children, and I was a very busy life, and I needed them to pull their weight, and it really, really worked. I'd say, no, don't come to me with that. That's my. We talked about that on Sunday. You know, go and find out who might take that on.
Jenny, it's 2:05, so we're going to have to let you go. It's been incredibly kind of you to talk to us, and I think, you know, hopefully it will be very helpful. I mean, I always find talking to you incredibly helpful. Just to reiterate, if people feel they want further support and perhaps more individualized support for their family, then they should get in touch with the Ruth Strauss Foundation.
Yes, get in touch, write into them. You look at their website and you'll see there's a very big bit about support. And if you follow it through, you'll see, you know, if you would like the 10 things I've written about what you need to think about. But then there's also a button you push. I'm hopeless with anything technical, but there's a button you push to say you would like to have a one-to-one session. And it won't, you know, one of the really helpful things is, as from next month, there are going to be other people doing this work in the Ruth Strauss Foundation with me. So you'll get someone who you can have a talk to. And that's why the charity's been set up. There were two reasons. Ruth particularly wanted people to have the sort of support that she'd had to talk about dying, and also wanted research. So Andrew set up a research arm and a support arm. So yes, please, and tell people that, you know, it's perfectly normal to ask for support, and you can book it in and get it. And look out for Red for Ruth Day, because next month there's a day at Lord's, the 13th of August, where all of the cricket world will be remembering Ruth and Andrew. But I've loved, thank you so much. I feel really pleased. I hope it was helpful. It feels very weird to do this on Zoom and not see you and properly, but you know.
Well, it's been really great to have you. I'm sure Deborah wants to say thank you as well, but we really appreciate your time, and it's great to see you again. Deborah?
Yes, I'd like to say thank you very much indeed. And now I can tell my 25-year-old that it's not okay to wee in the garage. So I feel very confident now having that conversation with him. So thank you very much indeed, Jenny.
I'm glad I was helpful.
Absolutely, hugely. You have no idea. So, but no, I mean, I think, you know, lots of the things you've said I've written down, and I think, yes, they resonate at whatever age the child is. And I know 25-year-olds think they're terribly grown up, but in reality they're not. So I think there's a lot that you've said that will resonate amongst us, you know, whatever age our children are. So thank you very much indeed for that.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jenny.
Now I push button to say leave, do I?
Yes, and I'll end. Thank you everybody for joining us as well. And you know, great to see you all. Thanks. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks, Jenny.